Ernest Hemingway is remembered as the quintessential American author. He was the rugged, hyper-masculine outdoorsman who wrestled with the typical artistic demons of depression and heavy drinking, eventually taking his own life in the summer of 1961. In the immediate aftermath, his wife Mary tried to shield his legacy. She told the press that the shotgun discharged accidentally while he was cleaning it. Even after Mary admitted it was a suicide 5 years later, the public and academic historians accepted a highly romanticized version of events. They concluded that a great writer simply lost his willpower and succumbed to the agony of the creative mind. But declassified government documents released in the 1980s, combined with modern medical analysis of his family history, reveal a completely different reality. Hemingway was not defeated by poetic angst. His death was the result of a fatal intersection, a perfect storm of an undiagnosed genetic disease, covert government surveillance, and destructive psychiatric treatments that systematically dismantled his mind and body. By his final years, Hemingway's physical health was collapsing. He suffered from extreme fatigue, severe joint pain, and organ failure. At the time, his doctors looked at his lifestyle and wrote these symptoms off as the inevitable results of heavy drinking and old age. This medical visualization shows what was actually happening. Hemingway suffered from hereditary hemochromatosis, a genetic disorder where the body absorbs and stores lethal amounts of iron, actively damaging organs like the liver, the pancreas, and the brain's basal ganglia. The basal ganglia is a group of structures deep in the brain responsible for motor control and emotional processing. When toxic levels of iron accumulate here, it triggers severe, treatment-resistant depression and rapid cognitive decline. On top of this iron toxicity, Hemingway's brain had sustained immense physical trauma. He endured multiple severe concussions from sports and survived 2 devastating plane crashes in 1954. This makes it highly likely he also suffered from chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE, a degenerative brain disease caused by repeated head injuries. This was a stark, inherited condition, not a psychological contagion. His father, 2 of his siblings, and later his granddaughter all took their own lives, tracing a clear, devastating genetic line through the family. Hemingway's deep melancholy was a physiological symptom. A biological toxicity was actively eroding the physical structure of his brain. In November 1960, Hemingway visited a bank in Ketchum, Idaho with his friend A.E. Hotchner. Hemingway was terrified, pointing out 2 men he claimed were FBI agents auditing his accounts and insisting his car and home were bugged. His friends, his family, and his medical team universally dismissed these fears as textbook paranoid delusions. Nobody believed him, leaving him completely isolated in his terror. Then, a Freedom of Information Act request, or FOIA, a law allowing the public to request records from federal agencies, was filed in 1983. The released files proved that FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover had harbored a deep animosity toward Hemingway since the 1940s and placed him under constant watch. The FBI tracked his physical and mental state right up until early 1961. Even worse, Hemingway's own psychiatrist, Dr. Howard Rome, was quietly passing information about his patient directly to federal agents. Hemingway's paranoia was an entirely accurate assessment of his reality. Because his doctors misdiagnosed a real, coordinated surveillance effort as madness, they pushed him toward a disastrous psychiatric intervention. Suffering from unchecked iron toxicity and a completely validated fear of federal agents, Hemingway was secretly admitted to the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota under the fake name George Saviors. To treat his supposed delusions, the doctors prescribed the standard intervention of the era, high-voltage, bilateral electroconvulsive therapy. This procedure applies direct electrical currents to both sides of the brain to induce a seizure. Applying high-voltage electricity to a brain already compromised by concussions and iron poisoning caused severe retrograde amnesia. It destroyed his linguistic ability. In January 1961, he was asked to write a short dedication for John F. Kennedy's inauguration. Hemingway sat at his desk and wept, entirely unable to string together a single coherent sentence. He later told his close friend that the clinic's treatment had wiped out his memory, his primary capital as an author. The medical intervention had eradicated his identity, leaving him entirely hollowed out. By the time he returned home to Ketchum in late June 1961, Hemingway was cornered. He was physically poisoned by his own genetics, psychologically hunted by his government, and intellectually erased by his doctors. Yet his final night on July 1st was remarkably calm. As his wife Mary sang to lighten the mood before bed, he simply turned to her and offered a quiet, affectionate goodbye. "Good night, my kitten." The last words he ever wrote were not a literary manuscript. He penned a brief, compassionate letter, wishing a quick recovery to his doctor's young, ill son, maintaining his dignity and his identity as Papa right to the very end. Early on the morning of July 2nd, wearing his red emperor robe, he walked to the kitchen to retrieve the keys to the basement. He bypassed his well-known hunting rifles and deliberately selected his favored W&C Scott & Son double-barrel shotgun. He walked upstairs to the front foyer, placed the gun against his forehead, and pulled both triggers. The precise, calculated nature of the act permanently dispelled his wife's initial story of a clumsy cleaning accident. Ernest Hemingway did not surrender to artistic despair. His mind, his body, and his reality were systematically dismantled by forces he could not fight, and he made the only logical choice left to a man stripped of all autonomy.